could that not have occurred to you, with all due respect? You were going to take a free holiday from someone you consider a friend. How could it not have occurred to you that that might not have been okay?
The fact is, we work sorry, let me just try to reorder the thoughts. We worked with the lobby conflict of interest commissioner on a regular basis on a broad range of issues when the issues come up. On this issue of a family vacation with a personal friend, it wasn't considered that there would be an issue there. Obviously, there was a mistake.
Say to yourself, this is not maybe the best thing to do. You never thought that?
Khan is someone who has been a longtime friend of my family's, a friend of mine, a friend to Canada as well. And for me to look for a place to have a quiet vacation where I can have quality family time is something we all look for with our families. The fact is, we work sorry, let me just try to reorder the thoughts. We worked with the lobby conflict of interest commissioner.
That's it. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. And action.
In times like these, we can't lose sight of what's important. It's important as a nation that we don't spend beyond our means. It's important our communities are safe and secure. It's important to help you save money so you can own a home, send your kids to school, and have enough left to retire on. Most of important of all, sorry, we blew it. This isn't the time for untested theories or risky schemes. It's the time for certainty. Sorry, I said schemes. This isn't the time for untested theories or risky schemes. I did it again. Schemes. Theories, themes. Theories, schemes. Risky schemes. Risky schemes or risky schemes. It's not a great risky schemes. It's an occasion to take a break from our busy lives and appreciate that family and friends mean everything. We'll sit down to meals prepared with a little special... Il commence à jouer du piano, de la guitare, et je l'accompagne du piano. Et I don't know, it's not working for me.
Oui, mais la première partie est excellente.
Ouais. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to have to decide whether we're scripting it. If we can do a script. You want to do a script? We'll do a script. Okay. We need to be certain that the government is living within its means. That when we raise taxes, or, sorry, I don't want to say the words raise taxes, and keep us moving towards the future. And that's what we want to be able to do when this election is over. Is that what you want?
Yeah, perfect. That's great.
When and how will the feds be able to step in to help on that front?
Certainly. I think we're all aware that a Prime Minister showing up in Fort McMurray when firefighters are busy trying to contain a massive raging wildfire is not a particularly helpful thing. The best thing I can do right now is make sure that our operations center and indeed the lines of communication with the folks on the ground and the folks in Alberta are as robust, instant and effective as possible. But I am certain that in the coming weeks I will have an opportunity to go out to Fort McMurray to both express my support directly to Premier Notley and Mayor Melissa Blake and others, but also to understand and share with Canadians the scale and the scope of the devastation that struck this community that for so many years contributed so much to the Canadian economy in terms of growth, and a community that now very much needs our help and attention. And that's certainly something I can't say I look forward to it, because just the pictures are troubling enough. But I know that it is going to be extremely important that I get out there.
Actually, the report itself, when you read it, is more damaging than just the finding that the Prime Minister broke some rules. Because when you you go through the sequence that Mary Dawson has laid out, the ethics commissioner, what you see is that it took a fairly high amount of willful blindness on the part of the Prime Minister to make himself believe that he was breaking no rules by going on this vacation.
Andrew.
And he tried to make the same case to her, and she pretty much blew it out of the water. This business about, oh, it was just a good friend who he hadn't seen in 30 years except for once at his father's funeral. Even friends don't necessarily give you large gifts at the time that they're lobbying the government, having dealings with the government. Look, if this had been another minister in the cabinet, presumably he or she would be out of their job right now. The Prime Minister broke the law in 4 different places, and that's just talking about the Conflict of Interest Act. I've seen people talking that, in fact, you could argue there were criminal code provisions broken here. If you're taking gifts from people who are doing business with the government, that's serious business.
So there are, yeah, go ahead,
I think there are some Liberal strategists who think they dodged the bullet by not having this happen while the House was sitting. I'd argue, one, that the scrum the Prime Minister gave and this embarrassing moment where he seemed at a loss for arguments to justify his side of the story, and the fact that it wasn't question period and the opposition asking for partisan reasons just before Christmas when people are going to be talking about stuff like that over turkey dinners is more devastating than a bad question period.
Yeah, I mean, there are no penalties attached to it. So this is really about how Canadians perceive this. Is it not, Andrew?
Well, yeah, but that's also a question is, and this has come up again and again, is our ethics laws, our ability to hold people to account is noticeably weak in this country. Why aren't there penalties attached to this? Why is it just that you get you have an embarrassing press conference where you look like a robot that's blown a circuit? But there ought to be presumably more stiffer consequences than this, and that should be one of the things that comes out of this.
The other good thing that may come out of this, if it is a good thing, is that if this report became the template for how the ethics commissioner approaches his or her job, in this case, since the next one is a he, then we might have better rulings than we've had in the past. This one took almost a year, 4 months of that as part of the Prime Minister not being available for the initial interview. But still, when you read it, you're really presented with the facts that she was presented with, and you actually read this and think, this is, not at all the impression that the government or the Prime Minister tried to give, and that is something that I think politicians in the future may come to fear.
So he said that he's going to be more proactive in the future. He's not going to take any holiday with family or friends without running it past. But the ethics commissioner, what does this tell you about what might be happening in his office, inside PMO, about the kind of counsel he may or not be getting, about what he thinks about the decisions he's making? I don't know if you want to sort of speculate on that, Andrew.
Well, we've seen these kinds of blind spots before. Remember how unrepentant he was in the business of the private fundraisers with the Chinese billionaires. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. We've seen these kinds of blind spots before. Remember how unrepentant he was in the business of the private fundraisers with the Chinese billionaires. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. We've seen these kinds of blind spots before. Remember how unrepentant he was in the business of the private fundraisers with the Chinese billionaires. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this, and somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. We've seen this with, these repeated occurrences where they just don't seem to be plugged into how people are viewing this. And somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. And somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. And somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent. And somebody is not actually in touch with the fabled middle class that they propose to represent.